to my immediate relative. And the response is, but is this person not also a Ghanaian? And when you say that there's a conflict of interest, people just either pretend they don't understand it or they really don't understand it. I'm thinking if Shraj is there and has this mandate, some of the things we can do on the prevention side, because it's so difficult to fight it after the fact. You can't get evidence, people don't want to testify, evidence is lost, and I think too often we throw most of our anti-corruption resources into the criminal law enforcement punitive side of things. And as we said in the morning, that's a really difficult fight. So prosecution has a lot of loops to go through, and even the best prosecution can result in a no conviction because you still have to pass the judicial process. So for me, I'm also looking for ways in which we can empower SWAT and all the anti-corruption bodies to do things that prevent the occurrence of these things. Is there room for ethics training, conflict of interest training?
Yes, in actual fact, at least I know that during my years in SRASH, and I am sure that they continue to do it. We did run some seminars, some workshops, some capacity building on conflict of interest, on the code of conduct. And in fact, one of the things that we used to do, and I'm not sure that we still do, but one of the things that we used to do was when there was a new parliament, we would run a special workshop for the parliamentarians on conflict of interest. I believe that also Shraj did produce some booklets on code of conduct and on conflict of interest. I know that we had a lot of, in fact, some of the very humorous things that happened during our workshop with the parliamentarians is, yes, you would think that perhaps they really didn't understand what conflict of interest was, because some of the questions that came up during those times showed that they're not getting it. There was one particular thing which really stood out, and we were talking about conflict of interest, we were talking about all sorts of things, and then there was an example that we used that, if you have say a travel and tours outfit, you would not be allowed to use that travel and tours now be getting all the tickets and the traveling arrangements for parliamentarians or the executive or whatnot. One parliamentarian actually stood up and said, why? And then as we were going out, he said to me in Chi, but my Chi is not very good, the pronunciation is not good, but the understanding is excellent. He said to me, what? Are you trying to tell me that now that I've come here, I'm not going to get something out of my outfit over there? Oh, David, I don't understand this sort of thing. So, for them, either they do not understand it or they refuse to understand. They understand it, but they know that they can get away with it. And they do get away with it, because straight away, I watched this gentleman after I was monitoring him, and yes, the executive and the parliamentarians used his outfit, amongst others. They used it, and they were buying their tickets and everything from there. So, in essence, why did he need to be a parliamentarian in the first place? Because he couldn't, But they also put public education in it. So yes, we do that. I'm sure that they still do that, or at least I hope so. You have to remember that some of these things also need to be funded, because we were not getting, at least at the time, we were not getting all the funding that we needed from the people who should be giving to us, our government. We're not getting it. We were getting most of our funding from outside. And that's also, it was very good for us because it allowed us to do a lot of the things that we could do at that time, is because we did get some funding. Fighting corruption is a very expensive thing. Investigation of corruption, which I found out even more to in depth when I went to African Development Bank, you need a lot of resources. To have a special prosecutor's office, you need a lot of resources. To have YOCO, you need a lot of resources. Investigation, corruption, investigation of criminal activities, you need a lot of. And if you are not getting it, then I'm afraid to say that then you're going to cut corners. And you're going to be forced to even sometimes make concessions and compromises because you need some funding to be able to move. So all these things, I don't know how we are going to put it in a framework which will ensure that especially anti-corruption bodies are adequately funded to make them independent. If we have to go to Parliament every time and beg for money, you can imagine we're not going to get it, because you're going to be investigating those same people who are going to give you the money and won't give to you. But if there's, I think Sharon was saying that they can't increase the funding. It doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make sense.
The CRC 2011, I think, had a proposal to create an independent constitutional bodies fund of sorts, where
yes, that's right.
various independent. Is there any other idea, funding model that you think might work for an anti-corruption body? Like, for example, you keep a certain percentage of your recoveries if you recover funds.
Yes.
Those kinds of models might work at least for scratch. I
think it could. When I was at the African Development Bank, what we did was we established a fund which we call the Africa Integrity Fund. And what we did was that the sanctioned companies and institutions who had to pay, who were sanctioned, they had to pay penalties. We put now their penalties into a fund, so that fund would be used for worthy causes. And if it meant also that you could use that fund to, say, investigate a particular matter, then you'd go and you would apply for that fund, for monies from that fund. That can be done here. That can be done.
But at the current arrangement, SRA doesn't have sanctioning power. Because it doesn't have any criminal.
Yes. So it has to be something that you have to look at how we can do that. If indeed we are saying that SRA should have the power not only to investigate but also to sanction, to prosecute.
Thank you. Okay, the floor is open. Okay. Your name and your affiliation, if any.
Hello, thank you. My name is Adam Sananu. I co-chair the Citizens Movement Against Corruption, but I also wear a hat as a member of the AU Advisory Board Against Corruption. I'll do a little bit of hop, skip, and jump. Could you thank you very much for that brilliant presentation representing most of our concerns. A number of them I want to add to, because I guess the number of voices you hear on a particular issue leave a certain impression on key things that you'd want to deal with as you look at the Constitution and review it. So there was a comment about 3.5 years out of the 4 years, you have the electorate on one side and the politicians on the other side, and citizens are not engaging as much in decision making. And could you make the point about giving a paper on participation. I wanted to speak to that a little. That between 2015 and 2018, we worked on the National Popular Participation Policy Framework for Ghana. I led the process. And our constitution is clear. Article 35(6)(d) talks about to make democracy a reality, we need to decentralize the administrative and financial machinery of government to all levels and provide all possible opportunities for citizens to influence decision making. Somehow the second half has not reflected. And what it is that the state has not intentionally provided the platforms and spaces for citizens to continuously engage on issues that come up, to the extent that we are holding duty bearers accountable, and that we're also reducing the risk of corruption. And then Article 242E also talks about as far as practicable, and it focuses much more on the MMDAs rather than the MDAs. But there's a need to make sure we have, in my view, perhaps beyond the popular participation policy framework, have even a law on participation. Because there's so much that would be dealt with in terms of accountability if citizens and stakeholders were continuously carried along with our processes. If you take a JAPA, if the stakeholders, key stakeholders, had always been at the table and being brought back, the results would have been different. If you take e-levy, almost every policy where we've had challenges and later we've had issues of corruption, if those stakeholders had been mapped out and brought to the table and continuously engaged in a permanent way, there would have been a lower risk of the kind of results that we got. So looking at making sure that participation is ingrained, citizens understand that they have an obligation. It's not just a passive thing that you are somewhere and you expect results after 4 years. We have to be there. Now that's also part of Article 41. I don't think we've done that education. Citizens are not empowered. Citizens are not responsible citizens at the moment. And we don't know that we are irresponsible citizens. So just talking to that, we're trying to take advantage of every trick in the book to make sure that any corruption cases take forever, making the appeals when necessary. How do we make progress in this context? Not too long ago, the president talked about fast-track courts. And it brought us just like our National Anti-Corruption Action Plan. But they focus on integrity, looking at the people, and they use a strategic plan framework. They indicated they have 12 specialized courts, and the administrative arrangements are such that they have target periods within which these cases must end. In other words, continuous sitting on a case rather than sit this week and then say come back after 2 months. So the arrangements are such that you can make progress, get results. It is publicized such that citizens know that this person didn't get away with stealing the money. They have been found accountable, they have been jailed, so much of the assets have been retrieved. So the issue of specialized courts as a way of making progress, I think is key. And that's on the sanction incentives, because normally we say for behavior change, you need both the reward incentives and sanction incentives. So the specialized courts and getting people jailed, it just deals with the sanction side. But I think we also need reward incentives. A few weeks back, the speaker was talking about integrity awards. And I was telling myself, perhaps this would have been better done by the state itself, such that when persons, whether it's whistleblowers or individuals, contribute to dealing with corruption in an accelerated manner, or they themselves refuse to be corrupted, and we have these examples, can we highlight them, can we reward them, can we commend them, so it begins to make citizens, young people understand that it is good to, eschew corruption. So specialized courts on one hand, rewards in terms of commendations and what have you. Then declaration of assets. There seems to be a reticence on the issue of verification and publication. The political elites have a problem. But those of us who represent the masses, we want to see comprehensive verification and full publication. So we appeal to you. At the end of the day, let's not find any middle point that was being suggested that, there's a middle point, maybe you partially, maybe the Auditor General's reps will open it and check. No, let's look at the best practice or good practice models internationally and have comprehensive verification and full publication. There's a point of, at the levels of sanctioning adequate. And so you talked about how the previous CRC recommended, if the person is found, he cannot hold office for 5 years, or the maximum prison sentence should be 5 years. I don't think that's high enough. It's not punitive enough. And I think that's part of the problem. The levels of sanction don't serve as a deterrent. So how can we look at it and make sure it is so punitive that people will begin to shy away from wanting to engage in it? I think that must also be taken into consideration. So very important question. I don't think that would be an adequate way to go. Let's make it more difficult for people to want to engage in corruption. Related to that would be the lack of sufficient highlighting of cases that have been investigated, people who have been found culpable, and how they have been sanctioned. And I think the reason why in crafting Act 959 we said the OSP must report every 6 months. Can we do something that compels all anti-graft agencies to report regularly? The AGs handles cases. They found people culpable. Money has been retrieved. Why isn't it being reported? Because the more we report, the more it begins to create awareness in people that this is not a profitable enterprise. So we need much more reporting of that. And I think, I don't know what was at lunch, Kojo was saying, report and publish, report and publish, report and publish. Let's make sure that we emphasize that. So the publication of the work being done by all these anti-graft, we don't hear much from Yoko, from BNI. At the moment it's on OSP. And so very soon they get all the attacks. All the questions are there. Let's make sure that we have this across board. And then embedded in that, in relation to education, NCCE's role, giving them enough funding, is it possible to embed in our curricula for young people this whole issue of corruption? Not just in the Constitution, not just at the moment have a chapter in the decentralization law also on corruption, but can we have it a permanent part of our curricula? The Nordic countries that have the lowest levels of corruption, you find that from childhood, they have models where they are teaching their children to look at ethical positions rather than, I think it's a brilliant idea. I kind of prefer that to having the EC responsible, because I think that the EC has enough on their hands. There's so much going on in the EC space. So I'll go along with those who want an independent regulator, especially where we've recognized that political parties now see our whole democratic exercise as a business transaction. They are not. This is not about just coming and giving good leadership. It's about we pump money in, how much money do we make out of it? So if we don't keep a very microscopic eye on what is going on there and set up standards and criteria, I think that one of the key problems of our democratic experience now is the political parties. And they don't know it themselves, but they are a key problem. So an independent regulator and what else we can put in there, I think would be very helpful. Two things: appointment from Parliament, how it undermines the oversight of Parliament. That's something we need to reduce. The number of people they are picking from Parliament means that we won't get good enough results from there. I think AC asked a question on how do we help the whistleblowers. Could you talk about the fact that people say they don't report because of retaliation? In fact, the Afrobarometer report had two things Ghanaians said why they will not report. One was a fear of retaliation, and the second was there will be no change. We don't think that even if we report, there will be any change. So if you want to change that situation, these two things must be addressed. I was asked about oral earlier in the year, and I kept saying I thought it was a brilliant idea, because for me to address these two things, the issue of retaliation, the composition of the committee was such that there were people who had kept the anonymity of persons who whistleblowed and provided them information. These are people with a track record of handling information without releasing their sources. And there were people who had also demonstrated results. So I'm thinking that if we're looking at systems that can address this, we need to address these two things. And I don't know how that will happen. But anonymity, how do we protect that? That's the key problem, why people will not report. And secondly, let's make sure that once information comes in, we are reporting the change. And then people will have much more confidence in that. Two more quick things I want to raise. Long-term planning, how we position NDP. Before you know it, somebody has their own pet project with a whole procurement agenda, and that's it. How do we lift NDPC and its long-term plan into the constitution such that parties need to come and align then we can build on the progress we have made in previous dispensations, rather than we come and we start a whole new thing again. And then the Public Accounts Committee and the ARICs, the Audit Report Implementation Committees. When these issues come up, some of us have been wondering, and I don't know whether Mr. Dominovo can help, but shouldn't we be able to get some sanctions? Because if the issues have been raised, after a year you come back, the same issues have been raised, the monies have been lost, and no action, no tangible follow-up actions. Shouldn't we find some way of creating a mechanism where the officers involved can be immediately sanctioned without a very long, laborious new process? I don't know, maybe we need some lawyers and judges to think through it. But it's a shame where this is being publicized. You see, that's part of desensitizing the public. And we are hearing it each time. Nothing has happened, and they come back, and it's like they are laughing, they are joking, they just talk. It's on live TV. We need to do something about that. Otherwise, let's stop publicizing it. How are we sanctioning these things and making sure they don't get repeated? Those would be my thoughts for now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Manasseh, we'll be back. We'll be with you shortly. I hear he's on the online. We've forgotten our online audience, but after you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Asante, thank you very much for your presentation today. I kind of concur with my colleagues in terms of your brilliant presentation and the administrative law elements in it. It shows how extensive you are in terms of that. In terms of the Article 55, you mentioned or you recommended that we should try and get or elect leaders with integrity. And I definitely agree with you on that notion. But the issue with us is, it's difficult to know that this person has got integrity, or the person can portray that they've got integrity. But once they take office, our systems in the country can corrupt the person. Or, as you rightly said, if they don't want to conform or fall in line, they'll stick out like a sore thumb, like you reiterated with Mr. Dominovo in his instance issue. So I think it's more about us trying to get our systems also to work with, so that when you are in there, and I cite an example with my colleagues during lunch, that a tax officer, a newly young graduate, and I went in as a tax officer. And I brought in millions of dollars pounds, to the UK government as revenue. But I never saw a penny as in cash. And when I tell my students this, they get amazed. They're like, are you sure? Are you sure you're not lying? And it's true. Because the system is such that you will not see a penny. How is that? Everything is, yes, a system, like you put it through. But Prof. Kakari also raised an issue whereby we can have the systems, the computers, and people can even intentionally break it. So when it's broken down, then you have to go by the natural, or the cash system. So again, it's difficult when we try and use a process. So I think it's all about the mindset of us as well. How can we, the word the reset is in the system now, how can we reset our mindset for us to try and not go into that? It's very important for us. But yes, you're right, good leaders, but we need the leaders to also have the same kind of mindset for the team that will come into office with them, for them to be able to work in that concept. Or else you can have a good leader, but if the bottom bit is all rotten, you still not get the achievement that we want to get in that regard. So I thought that might be a good one for us over there. In terms of the preventive measures, it's very essential for us to use that to reduce or eradicate corruption in our system. Again, has to be put in place for this to take place, for the preventative measures to take effect. And thank you. And so I use an example of, we always say politicians are corrupt. Politicians are corrupt. So we have politicians that come in on timely basis. So now we have the NDC guys in, but don't forget that these are just a mere fraction of us. But public servants are the majority. They come and meet So whether they change some of the leaders at the public office, it's still really irrelevant in the sense that we have the chunk of our public servants or the civil servants at the base. And I was saying they are not corrupt there. I've had several encounters. So again, it's not only politicians that we should be looking at. This comes to the next area of my issue of us trying to do the asset declaration. I believe the asset declaration, they should go through all the public office, because the Constitution says public offices asset declaration. Every public servant should also declare their assets. Again, I will compare or juxtapose this to that of the UK. As I said, I'm still supposed to be a civil servant in the UK. I'm on a career break. So when Ambassador Bosman said that 2 years you go on we call a career break. After 2 years, you justify why you should get more years. The beauty of it is your job is secured. You don't get paid whilst you're on a career break, but your tenure is secured for how many years you are on a career break. So my pension, it's all paused, but my job is secured. If I go back today, they are waiting for me to come back into the job. So that is one thing. So job security can also help us reduce the corruption in the country, because if you know that a new government comes in, I'm going to go. Of course, when I'm there, I'm going to pack up a lot of stuff just to secure my time that I will be there. So it's very important. But we also have to look at civil servants and public service in that regard, and how they can declare their assets right from where they are in their position. You might think that the lower ranks might not need to declare their assets, but that's where a lot of corruptions happen. And so it's very important for us to let them also declare. A system that we use in the UK is, we call something security clearance. I don't know if I'm supposed to say it, per our code of conduct. So we are very strict when it comes to code of conduct. We abide by it or else you'll be kicked out. So they put a fear in us before you are even recruited as a public servant in the UK. And we do security clearance based on the department you're going into, the level you're going into, the role you're going into. So we have levels of security clearance. And the level you go into, it depends on how you declare your assets. And the lifestyle audits, very, very important. We Rover, they will question me how. If it's by loan, they want to see whether I took the loan from the bank, wherever, because they don't want you to be influenced, not by politicians, but even by the public. So these are all important areas that you need to. So yes, you might be using luxurious car. Well, your colleagues will even be looking at you when you are going to the car park to pick your car, and that's where the whistleblowing and anonymity whistleblowing can come in as well over there. So it's very important that we look at that, because the rationale is obviously to be able to get us, if you know that you're going to be security clear, you have to be security cleared. I did a loan at another department, and my security clearance took like 3 months or 4 months. But I did not start the job until they go and interview like your partner, your friends around you, and they do a separate interviews with them, and they ask them all certain questions before they clear you and before you take up the post. So again, so these are some of the areas. And lastly, in terms of the prosecution side, so we have so many. Look at merging some of these, because I had a criminal case, because you have to account for every pesewa or penny that you spend, and so certain departments or agencies shouldn't be taking some of these, and so we should look at probably merging these. And lastly, Shira's investigative power. So I discussed this a lot with my constitutional and administrative law students, and I was telling Ambassador Bosman that again. So maybe we can go for again constitutional interpretation on that subject to see whether they will give you back your investigative powers.
We don't need to. You can reverse it in the Constitution.
Because I think Suraj needs to be given that investigative power so that they are not. They don't have to investigate only by invitation. So that was the key word there. They can actually go and investigate and. Yes, I think. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, this side of the Manuel. Manasseh. Hello? Are you still there?
From here for the opportunity. I have a few suggestions to make, and all of them are geared towards strengthening one point. I'm wondering if we can use this process to ensure that those who are supposed to prosecute, seek our interest in the fight of corruption can also be held accountable, whether they can be compelled by law to do certain things, and failure to do that could be the basis for their removal from office. I'm saying this because businesses in this country steals 100,000 cities or 10 million cities. That institution would hand the person over to the police. The police can investigate and then secure conviction. But if this same person were to do the looting in the public sector, all of a sudden, the police are incapable of investigating and getting the person jailed. We have the SHRAD, we have the IOCO, we have the OSP, we have the Attorney General. We are still grappling with the inadequacy of laws and giving reasons all the time why certain things cannot happen. I strongly believe that despite the weaknesses of our system, those we put in charge of fighting corruption should also be accountable to us, because we knew the audit service before Mr. Dominivo went there. We knew the audit service whilst he was there, and we now know the audit service in his absence. The same institution, but depending on whoever is there, we are talking about one moribund institution and one that is so active that state officials and politicians are beginning to fear and want to do what is right. So I believe that we should be thinking about how to get or compel public officials to be able to do their work. Two, with SHRAD, I would want to add my voice to the call for SHRAD, not only to be able to investigate, but also to prosecute. I say this because in many instances, SHRAD completes its report, sends it to the Attorney General, and then nothing happens. There was one case I followed, and it took SHRAD about 11 years to conclude nationwide contracts to provide sanitation equipment and get paid for the assemblies. But long before the equipment were and the tools were even provided, the assemblies were paying. So a whistleblower from the Bunahaf region at the time petitioned SHRAD. SHRAD started this investigation, and the company said SHRAD didn't have what it took to do the investigation legally. SHRAD went to court and everything. Eventually, SHRAD won. After 11 years of spending resources, the report was completed, handed over to the Attorney General. Monies were supposed to be recovered, out of which 10% was to be paid to this whistleblower in the Diayao and Kwanta area. As we speak, nothing has come out of it. The whistleblower didn't get anything. The state did not get a peswa of the money that was supposed to be retrieved. And that company, Zoblion, is still in very good business. So the SHRAD had the mandate to prosecute. I believe we could be asking maybe different questions. If we think that the political class, the Attorney General often represents, may be compromised in a way because of their relationships with some of their own politicians and private businesses, they cannot do the work. At least SHRAD should be empowered that way. And finally, I also want to add my voice to the law on proving. When it has to do with corruption, I believe we should push for laws that lower the threshold of proving beyond reasonable doubt. We know that corruption in this country has advanced, but we are yet to get to that stage where corrupt persons would offer receipts for monies they receive. So in most cases, you don't find any documentary trail, nothing to suggest that this contract that cost 5,000 was supposed to have been just 100 cedis, but the money was shared. So I believe that we should begin to push for the proof, the burden of proof, to rather be on whoever is caught with money they cannot explain. So that we don't have people like Cecilia Dapa walking freely. When I did the contracts for sale documentary, the PPA CEO was found to have put so much money in his bank account, cash deposits. At the time, it was up to about 41 million Ghana cedis within the 2.5-year period it was there. And this was what we suspected, or that what was put there in cash. We don't know what he may have acquired by way of buying real estate or other properties. But 2019, since this revelation happened, as we speak, nobody has even followed up to ask where the money is after the system allowed him to go back to court and get all the money, the accounts were frozen. That clearance was given, and as we speak, all the monies were taken, and no single institution has followed up to even ask questions. And finally, I also want to appeal to some of the state institutions present there, that when it comes to corruption, it isn't every case that can lead to prosecution or even conviction. They should devise other means of getting people to face some level of consequences in terms of the public knowing. I have had the instance to disagree with some of my friends, the office of the prosecutor, when a businessman was said to have gone to Parliament to bribe MPs. The MP said it openly, but when the investigation started, some of them didn't want to come forward. But there were other pieces of evidence that pointed to who the businessman was. This businessman was actually invited, I don't know whether we can call it arrest, by the OSP, interrogated, and when the report was being issued, the OSP deducted or covered the name of this businessman. And at the end of the day, nothing was in that report. And I believe that even if the names and everything, whoever they interviewed, was left there, and at the end of the day, the report says, look, we cannot prosecute for ABC reasons, that name being there alone could have deterred some other people, because there was reasonable suspicion or evidence or intelligence to point to the fact that this was the person who went there, but the investigation couldn't proceed just because those who are alleged to have been bribed were not prepared to cooperate after they had publicly stated that someone came in there to try to bribe. So the point I'm trying to make is that it isn't in every case that we can get to the bottom of the matter, but anti-corruption agencies, institutions, and public officials mandated to represent our interests in those institutions should begin to find ways of making corruption unattractive, even if we ultimately cannot get people to jail. And finally, maybe, I don't know how possible this is, but shouldn't we be considering some exceptional circumstances when private individuals can take some corruption cases to court, and if they win, they get a percentage of how much they retrieve for the state? If that happens, we can have civil society organizations and others, other individuals, being able to hold certain people who have become so untouchable because of their connections with the political class, and sometimes their connection with the state institutions that are mandated to hold them accountable for their deeds. I think if that happens, we should be getting many more people interested, especially now that we have whistleblowers who report, and sometimes they are giving little or no protection, or sometimes they are even giving away. And when the cases go through, like this Shraj case that was investigated and the report submitted, at the time, Gloria Kufu was the Attorney General, and I had a copy of the report. I knew what was in there, but nothing happened. If that happens, I think we may be getting more people getting interested, and perhaps retrieving more money and making it difficult for people to bribe everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up, if you can stay with us for a couple of minutes. So this general idea of holding the anti-corruption agencies accountable, themselves accountable, I think it's an interesting angle to come from. So let me give a couple of options or just ways that we could think about this. So let's say we have a number of anti-corruption agencies or anti-crime agencies, I guess, the police, UOCO, FIC, any number of them, OSP. Now, I think it would be, just taking a lead from that general proposition of yours, it seems to me quite sensible to say that if a state agency, any one of these state agencies, investigates a crime or of corruption and makes a recommendation to the prosecutorial authorities, right, and recommending prosecution, then the prosecutor would be under an obligation to proceed with prosecution or else give public reasons why prosecution would not be warranted in those circumstances, right? Because my thinking is, we've spent public money and resources going through an investigation. A competent public body has done that. The outputs or the outcome of their investigation is entitled to some kind of regard or consideration by the prosecutorial authority. So if they refuse to proceed with the recommendation that there should be prosecution, then at the very least they must give public reasons why not to prosecute. A second way we could actually enforce your idea, it seems to me to be that even the investigator themselves, if you do an investigation of a high-profile case and you come to a conclusion that prosecution is not warranted, you should tell us why. Right? I like your idea. I'm just trying to find ways of practically making it work. That if you are mandated to fight corruption, you investigate a case, you come to a conclusion, no prosecution warranted. Give us a reason. You come to a conclusion, prosecution warranted. The AG says, I disagree. The AG, give us a reason why you disagree, right? Those are, in my view, two possible ways we can actually enforce this idea of holding anti-corruption agencies accountable to the public for the work that they do. My second question is to you in your role as an investigative journalist. In what ways do you think that the laws around media or investigative journalism as they currently are in the country hamper the fight against corruption, and how could we make the work of investigative journalists and the media a lot less onerous in the fight against corruption?
Thank you very much for this. On the first one, I want to add that even the institutions that do the investigation themselves would still have more questions to answer, not only on the investigations they do, but what they refuse or fail to do. For 2.5 years, someone whose account barely had any significant amount going into that account gets into public office, and sometimes you have $200,000 cash getting into that office, $100,000, 300,000 cedis cash, to the extent that we had about, I think, $4 million some cedis, and at the time, the exchange rate at the time, everything added to like 41 million Ghana cedis. If it were today's terms, it would be far more than that, because the dollar and then the euros, when converted, would put the figure even higher. The question is, we have FIC. If you ever try getting money from abroad and the money is your account, sometimes the procedure, sometimes $1,000. Your bankers would have to ask you, how did you get this money? What work did you do? Sign that. And sometimes when you are frustrated, they explain to you that, look, you see these money laundering stickers here. We have to do our work, otherwise we'll get into trouble. The question is, when politically exposed persons are putting these amounts of money in their bank accounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars, what happens? Do the banks notify the FIC? And if they did, what did the FIC do about it? So when matters of this come up, one of the things we should be asking is, if the banks actually notify the FIC and the FIC did nothing about it, then whoever has the FIC and those in line are not fit to hold their position, because they look away whilst crime is being committed, and they may even be complicit. So beyond what they investigate, sometimes when there's clear evidence, as in the case of the PPA CEO, that a crime of this nature happened, we expected FIC to have held the banks responsible, and if it occurred or it came out that the banks did their work by reporting but they did nothing, then certain people should lose their jobs. So whoever occupies that position would think twice before looking away the next time. So that is one thing I would want to add to that accountability on the state institutions. Now to the investigative journalism part. I often say that many journalists would be happy to do investigative reporting. Everything aside, there's prestige in it. It sets the journalist apart. It has given some of us so much exposure and benefits that during the day-to-day reporting could not have. I was in Harvard last year, fully paid for fellowship and everything. These are benefits of investigative reporting. But the cost is so huge that it overshadows the benefits. So when I speak to young journalists in the journalism training institutions and I ask them if they want to do investigative reporting, they all know. The very visible one that everyone tends to perhaps appreciate is the danger we face in terms of physical harm. But there is a legal aspect of it that hampers the work of investigative journalists. people can just saddle you with so many court cases. In the past 10 years, I have been sued 11 times for defamation. 4 of the suits were, I think, 2 each from different institutions, but the other 7 were individual institutions. So it's like, as we speak, those that we have 7 of them, not the only ones that have gone to trial, or the only one has gone to trial, and the SML one is just starting. And in the previous one, there was a case that sued 2017. And then the corrupt businessman who sued me went to the head of a very prominent religious organization in this country, and somebody from that family met me. That, well, they think the man has spoken to them, it was possible we could get this case resolved. Who was the first person? A former chief of staff at the office of the president told me they could get it done. I said, well, I have been accusing this person of corruption. Nobody's doing anything about it. So if he sees me, it will be an opportunity for me to prove in court that he's actually corrupt. Then the Minister of State also did the same. I rejected. Then I asked this man. He sued me. So if he wants this case to be resolved and then whatever, am I the one to give permission? And he said that, look, he said he thought that after suing you, you will slow down, that it looks like you are even escalating it, deceiving worse than before. So he wanted to make peace. And what I said was that I couldn't guarantee that if I made peace with him and found any corruption case about his businesses later, I wouldn't report it. There is something which is common in the US here that they call SLAP, Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. A lot of these suits happen because the business people, the influential people just want to intimidate the journalists and the media houses. I'm so lucky that when I was at Joy, the multimedia group paid for every legal cost that came with them. Some of them even sued me based on Facebook posts I made because of the corruption in their businesses. 2 of them, RLG and then Zoom Nylon, they were based on my Facebook comments about their businesses. The multimedia group paid the legal fees. Then, when I got to the 4th estate, whatever came, the Media Foundation did it, and I think recently the Africa Center for Energy Policy is also helping. I'm saying this to emphasize that if all these monies for the legal battles were to come directly from me, I would at a point begin to think twice and say, look, I cannot foot the legal cost of even defending myself. So I want to backtrack. There was an instance that we were sued by someone outside of the jurisdiction of Ghana. And the cost was so much that we couldn't get lawyers to defend us there. We were advised to try a settlement, and we made concessions, and this person said, no, we had to take down the story and then do a whole lot of things. Then we felt that no, apologize and pay money, all of that, and we felt everything we published was right. We could defend this anywhere, and I've never negotiated any suit. All those who went away, they stopped following after I filed my defense. But in this case, getting a lawyer and a legal firm in that jurisdiction was so expensive. So what happened? Eventually, we got some lawyers who said they would represent us for free, and if they won, they would get the court to get the money from those people. And all of a sudden, these people were not prepared to negotiate. We are prepared to negotiate now, and they were even prepared to now pay our lawyers for whatever cost they had incurred. so that this case wouldn't go to court. And what this says is that these people knew that they had no case against us, but they also knew that we couldn't raise the money to defend ourselves. So one of the things that I think maybe we should be considering for not only investigative journalists and the media, but also civil society and other persons who are committed to blowing the whistle, is to begin to look at anti-slap laws. Laws that will prevent powerful people who have so much money to get a belt. If all these cases were to go to trial, you can imagine the number of times I'll be in court every single month. This is in addition to being a witness for some state institutions, like the Office of the Special Prosecutor. I do sometimes for the Attorney General's Department and all of that. So I might spend all the time being harassed by lawyers and cross-examination, and then the work itself will not be done. So if there's one thing that I think the Constitution or maybe the legal system can protect those who stick out their necks to fight corruption, they should in a way be saved or protected from legal harassment, legal suits that do not have any merit, that are targeted at silencing the people who engage in exposing those acts of corruption. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Emmanuel K. Dogbedi. I'm the managing editor of Ghana Business News. A lot has been said about structures. And the problem I have noticed with anti-corruption systems in Ghana is we have the traditional systems, and because they are dysfunctional, we create more structures. The CID, the IFC, what have you, were supposed to be dealing with corruption. And because they were ineffective, we set up charge, another layer of structure, more costs. And then with time, they also become dysfunctional or ineffective. Then we say, let's get a special prosecutor. Then we got a special prosecutor. And the first special prosecutor was dramatic, as we all experienced. And then, of course, he gave up. And now we have another special prosecutor who consistently gets pushed back by government institutions by refusing to give him information. Others refuse to cooperate with him. For a long time, they didn't even have funding to do their work, and so on and so forth. And now we are talking about independent prosecutor. You know, another layer of structure, more cost. And with time, the independent prosecutor would face a lot of pushback. Then we start thinking of traditional prosecutor, because the foreign one, the ones with foreign names have failed, right? So maybe say a Himfie prosecutor. You know, it's like nothing is working. We show intent, but in reality, things don't seem to work. And to follow on with Manasseh's contribution, journalists, we talk about whistleblowers, but how about journalists? Journalists take great risks to expose corruption. They are not protected. I run an organization, we don't have funding. If somebody hits us with a lawsuit now, there's not a single Ghanaian organization we can turn to for help. And as I speak now, one of my reporters has been sued for a story he's yet to write. We haven't even published it. He is being sued because he sent a set of questions. And of course, we always insist on the right to reply when we are writing about you. So he sent a set of questions, and the subject says, I won't respond. And the next thing, he's been sued. And we've been going to court for a month now. And I kept wondering why the judge hasn't thrown out the case. And we have to go and find money outside Ghana to pay the lawyer who is taking on the case for us. How does the law protect journalists like us who have no structures, like systems in terms of organizational structure, financial muscle, and the ability to hire lawyers to defend us in the course of our work, because we don't also sell our stories. In fact, we literally work voluntarily, so we are funding our operations from our lunch money, as it were. And so it's purely work of dedication, not because we are selling the story and making money from it. Is there a way we can have a law? I don't know whether it should be in the Constitution or an LI or an act where it's clearly stated that if a journalist exposes corruption and the state intentionally prosecutes and some funds are retrieved, the journalist is paid a certain amount of money. Because I know that happens in Uganda. For instance, if a journalist reports a case of corruption and the state retrieves some money, the journalist is paid a percentage of the money. Because that can also be an effective way of encouraging journalists to continue to report on corruption. And as a result of what Manasseh shared, SLAP, a lot of young journalists are discouraged from engaging in hard-hitting journalism. I do training of young journalists in anti-corruption reporting, illicit financial flows, and some would ask you, why would you want me to do such a high-risk job? It's indeed high risk because you are reporting on people who are corrupt, engage in illicit financial flows, and therefore have tons of money to throw away. They have enough money to hire the best lawyers. And of course, if you have money to pay any lawyer, you can hire their services. And even though these lawyers know some of these cases are frivolous, they are making good money. So they go to court. How do we legislate protection of journalists? Because the Constitution gives us freedom to operate, but we have no protection. We have no shield. If I go out there to expose corruption and whoever I expose meets me in a corner and slaps me, it's my personal responsibility to fight back. The police is not going to get up automatically to say a journalist has been attacked, so they're going to do their work if I don't report to the police. Or even when I report to the police, they may decide not to act on it. So how do we legislate protection of journalists? How do we legislate supporting journalists? I know in some countries, for instance, the law requires that the state allocates a certain budget to support journalists by buying advertising space in specific media houses. A certain percentage is allocated, and each media organization can apply or open their spaces for government institutions and organizations to advertise so they can generate revenue. I don't know if it is the same in Ghana. I haven't come across any such law. So if journalists cannot afford to even pay for their own investigations, it becomes even more difficult to pay for legal costs when people attack them with legal cases in the line of exposing corruption. So are we going to do that, and how do we do that? Would we include it in the Constitution? Do we think we need an LI, or do we need an act to do that? Because it's becoming common that journalists who expose corruption become more exposed to legal challenges, which is more expensive. And that is actually dissuading a lot of young journalists from engaging in hard-hitting journalism. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Chairman, I want to go back to something Manasseh said, and then also Ambassador Bosman, I will ask you to help me with something. Manasseh made mention of problems of record keeping in our system, and therefore how to track what people's incomes or assets are in this very informal economy. So if I have 1,000 cedis, for example, and you ask me how I got it, I sold my goods and I bought it. And in this economy, there's no documentation in the informal sector. My question is, in order that this whole business of assets declaration will be effective and to avoid some of these things, what can we do? Perhaps Mr. W, who is an accountant and who has been in this business for a while, may help us in how we put in the mechanisms to document assets, incomes, and so on. If people who are working in the informal sector, particularly salary earners, it's very easy to track some of these things, especially if they are paid from, let's say, the consolidated fund. It's easy to determine that they should have received 20,000 cedis within this period. So how come their assets are worth so much? And so on. So I think that's one area that needs some thinking about. And Mr. Bosman, two things have come up here, and I think Manasseh also mentioned it. The shrines being proactive in taking up investigation. What would be the challenges if Shraj was to take up, to proactively engage in, rather than, as the Constitution says, being responsive to allegations and complaints and so on. My other comment, my other point is, in your experience at Shraj and from what you know about Shraj, the cases that are reported to the Attorney General, can you give us an idea of the success rate when Shraj has made complaints to, say, the Attorney General's office, the outcomes, how successful have they been? We need to know this. We can do that.
The second question is very easy to respond. During my time at Shraj, the reports that were taken to the Attorney General for the Attorney General's attention or for the Attorney General's reaction, we don't have any of them that have come back with our recommendations that have been followed, or that we did not have any responses why they were not followed. Okay, and indeed, the way the whole setup is in the Constitution is, the Attorney General, he has discretion, discretion whether or not to follow our recommendation. He doesn't have to, and therefore he doesn't, or he didn't at those times, and he didn't justify why he didn't do it. With the first question, whether there were any challenges if Shraj took up investigation suo motu, there's no challenges except for the challenge of perhaps not having sufficient funds perhaps to investigations. For the case that we were talking about right now, for the Annaly case, nobody asked us to go and take out the matter. We did, because of the complaints and what we saw in the newspapers and people were talking about it quite a bit. So we decided, let's go and look at what it is, what it all is. And one of the things that was, you may not know, but one of the things which was very innovative about the way that we handled that particular case was that when it became difficult to as it were, pay for one of the witnesses, the main witness, to come to Ghana and come and respond to some of the allegations, etc., to give us a testimony in person. What we did at the time, this was then we arranged to have a video conferencing from the states, and that's how we managed to also get some of the information. And what we did was we used our own, creative ways of doing things. And one was, get the witness to go to one of the mission, and if the mission was not able, the mission would find somewhere where that person could give the testimony. So that was the main challenge. And at the time, when we did ask or subpoena people to come before Shrash, they did. They did. So at least whilst I was there, it may have been difficult sometimes to get them, but they came. Such was the belief that under the Constitution we had that right. Subsequently, I'm not too sure what happened afterwards, but I think that I can also say that some of my investigators at the time, I know, were harassed, and they were coerced into doing certain things that they shouldn't have done. So those, we can say, these in themselves are challenges. There were not enough protection also for Shrash members, for investigators. Perhaps that's also a challenge. But that we didn't have, or at least I didn't feel that, if we wanted to take this investigation, that there was a impediment for us not to take, because we believed that we could. We believed that we could. We didn't believe that we could not do it. And if we were not able to do it, it was perhaps because of funds, or because I didn't have enough investigators at the time, or perhaps the investigators were being harassed or coerced into certain things. Those were the main challenges we had.
So from just a quick response to Emmanuel's question, and perhaps also to Manasseh's about the current state of the law and what protection or shield it provides or does not provide to journalists. I think everything that's currently in the law on file, including the practice, increasingly being discarded in most even common law jurisdictions, but this practice in our courts of prior restraint, the Americans call it prior restraint, which is that even before you publish, even when you have not published something, here it is possible for what you have not published to be enjoined, to be stopped, which is quite bizarre, right? But it happens here. I can't see how it squares with the constitutions, but it's common law practice. It can be done away with by statute, or it can be done away with in the Constitution, right? And I think at the minimum, prior restraints should not be allowed. Pre-publication injunctions, like you haven't published the thing. You cannot defame somebody with something you have not published, right? So it's just simple. But somehow, it's very common in our jurisdiction, and it's come to be accepted by the courts. So I think at the minimum, I would say, one of the things we can do away with is that legal doctrine from the common law, which, like I said, is being discarded in most common law countries don't even follow that rule. The other things are a bit, I think we can enhance whistleblower protections even more. We can, of course, the incentive issue. I think the last stakeholder meeting, somebody also proposed a loser pays principle, right? Where, those who bring opportunistic lawsuits just to basically prevent journalists from doing their work and saddling you with legal fees. One of the ways you can disincentivize that kind of opportunism is by shifting essentially the cost. At the end of the day, the loser pays your fees, right? If you have a loser pays rule, it means that those who bring bad suits, knowing that they are bad, but just to harass you, will in the end pay for it because your legal fees will be shifted onto them and they will pay it. So, that's one of the ways in which you discourage these opportunistic lawsuits that are brought to harass people, is the loser pays principle. And, the recovery, the idea of keeping some of the amounts that you recover when you expose corruption, or if you do a private course of action, if we allow private persons to prosecute corruption cases, it would not be done as a criminal prosecution. Usually it would be done almost as a civil case, but with money damages being awarded to the state, and you get a portion of it. So there are ways in which I think the law, we can revise the current state of the law and modify it to really both protect journalists who do anti-corruption work as well as reward them. Both provide a shield for you as well as to reward you. But I think on the defamation side, certainly this prior restraint business should not be going on in the 21st century. There should be no reason why courts should be preventing this lawsuit you just mentioned. You just administer a questionnaire, and then this person figures out from the questionnaire where you are leading, and then they bring a preemptive lawsuit based on what? That you gave them a questionnaire to fail? I mean, that's a bizarre kind of...
Yes, Manasseh Asuru's issue of reducing the burden of proof. I don't know whether he's looking at why we shift, the burden on the accused. The burden of which should be on him rather, instead of saying that maybe we should reduce the burden, because
there's been burden shifting in other jurisdictions, right? But you can also do presumptions. I mean, article, like I said, I think the article on asset declaration and what happens, there's a presumption there that if you made money subsequent to your first filing, if your network has grown in ways that cannot be explained, you are deemed, which is you are presumed to have acquired it illegally. So even the Constitution allows that presumption to be made. Right, and therefore the burden is on you. Once a presumption has been made against you, the burden is on you to prove that it is actually wrong, that the money was acquired lawfully. So the principle of shifting the burden through changing the presumption is already there. I think we just need the legal system to get used to the idea, and maybe the way you do it is to take it out of here and blow it up more in statute, so that it's understood. Or if it's not, it's going to be challenged, then maybe you expand it in the Constitution and say, like, look, this presumption is allowed.
Yeah, when it comes to corruption matters, we can do that. Why not?
Yes.
Then this,
Yes.
sorry, are you on the floor? Let me finish. This loser pays principle, I think in civil practice, I mean, the costs follow the events. But the problem we have in Ghana is that our costs are too low. Our costs are too low. With a very low cost, you waste so much time in court, and then they don't really take into account how much that it is that you have wasted.
Yeah, what cost, or do the costs include the other person's all their legal fees?
They don't care about it. They have awarded you costs.
Oh, but then let's help.
Although CI makes it clear that the awarding court, they should take certain things into consideration. Yet the costs which are awarded come nowhere near. You know, how much is it that they don't care? They've given you awarded the cost. Of course, these days the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal are going up. But the High Court, it's still quite ordinary. So I don't know what he thinks we can do about that. Again, I don't know whether they are looking for a fund to be set up to help them. Of course, with the opportunistic ones, as you are saying. But they should know the law of libel. They should be careful before they publish. They should check their facts. So if the facts are not correct and you are sued, you should cry your own cry. But if you have done the proper thing and you are struggling, maybe then we can look at these areas that they are talking about, whether there can be a democracy fund set up for them. And with the many difficulties we have been having with releasing funds, you know, even all the independent bodies are not getting what they ought to get. They are not getting what they ought to get. I don't know whether if they set up the fund, the monies will be paid into them for them to even benefit. Then the Shiraj is in the same position. I don't know whether they have anything like the IGF. I don't know whether they have IGF, because they are also complaining that they cannot meet, you know, their obligations because of lack of funds.
Right. Now, if they were to have prosecutorial power and therefore the power also to levy fines and sanctions and stuff, then they would have IGF.
So those are the things we should rather be looking at.
Then would have that.
That's what we should be looking at.
As of now, you just investigate. You can't levy any fine. You can't sanction anybody. You can't prosecute. Where are you going to get your IGF? It's not going to happen.
That's it.
So I think that should be tied to.
We should be looked at.
Yeah.
Look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thanks, Dr. Asante, for the presentation. That was very insightful. My name is Seth Bope. I work with the Fourth Estate. It's an accountability journalism project of the Media Foundation for West Africa. There was a conversation around whether Shraj should be the custodian of the asset declaration. We have done a bit of work around the asset declaration, and from our experience, we don't think Shraj will be able to do that work. I'm saying this because 3 years ago, we did some work where we revealed almost 428 public office holders had not declared their assets. And this list included 27 ministers. As of May 2022, 27 ministers from President Akufo-Addo's regime, both first and second term, never declared their assets. Never. 11 from President Mohammed's regime never did it. Others did it partially. They either did it when they were entering office or when they were exiting. Shraj was petitioned by, I think it was Nico Puku of CDD and 4 others. Till now, Shraj's investigation has not come to an end. This is 3 years ago. So I don't see how they were able to take an extra burden of investigating and then taking custody of, something like this. I think probably also this may have happened because on the part of the public office holder, the non-declaration or non-compliance, maybe because they are not well oriented. For instance, there was a deputy minister I called, and he said, "Oh, my brother, I didn't get anything. So what do you expect me to declare?" So in his mind, he needed to get something from the office before he does the declaration. Another person said, "But that thing, we do it only once." This is somebody who had done it when he was appointed in 2017. And when we contacted him in 2022, we thought that thing is supposed to be done only once. So probably the orientation part of it. So when Ambassador Bosman talks about reorienting, new parliamentarians, I think it would be good to do that. And to even think that about 185 MPs at the time we did this investigation, had not done the declaration at all, 185. So I don't know whether they think they can get away with it, that's why they do it, or they simply don't know about it. And for me, I think, thinking about the ways around it, one, probably we should give this responsibility to the OSP. The OSP. Yes. I believe that if the OSP can investigate corruption and anti-corruption related issues, and that they are more dreaded than Shraj. I'm saying this because Shraj doesn't prosecute. If they don't prosecute, why should I be bothered? When you hear the OSP's name, there's a certain level of fear in you. So I would want this to rather go to the OSP. And then secondly, I think another level of it can be strengthening our digitalization process. For now, if you want to register your car, you need to connect it to the Ghana card. If you want to register your land, your house, it needs to be connected to the Ghana card. At the click of a button, you can easily track all the assets, unless of course they are registered in somebody else's name. And then also, we are doing some work on the Political Parties Act. I wouldn't want to give out so much, but I think if there's any regulation to be done, it should be done around the candidates. The Political Parties Act does not regulate candidates, but rather the parties. So the Act wants the parties to file their asset declaration and liabilities, but the candidate, for instance, the presidential candidate, who receives so much money, is not captured. We can't assume that because the parties are captured, automatically the candidates will be captured as well, or will be responsible. And then also, we've done some bit of work around using the RTI law. By the way, the RTI law is what we use to get the information. We go from the Auditor General. In fact, my thesis was on the asset declaration law. I had done the same request at the time I was a student. They told me, my friend, these things are not entertained here. You can't come and ask about who and who has declared their assets. So I wasn't given the list. But through the RTI law, years later, I was able to get that document. But I think there's a problem with the implementation of the law. First of all, it looks as though there are some institutions that have immunity from giving you information. They don't want to do it. Minerals Commission is one. From 2021, every single information you've asked from the Minerals Commission, they've not given it to us. They've been fined. They've gone to court to fight us, but the information, no. Even when they are surcharged, I think probably because the fines, they're not paid by the head of the institution. They don't care about, giving you the information. And for some reason, the RTI Commission also thinks that the fine, I'm not saying that is what they actually do, but I think from my intuition, they think that the fine becomes a substitute for the information. Because the moment they are fined, they don't give you the information. I even doubt if they pay the fine. Secondly, the security services, the Ghana Police Service, never. They would never give you information if you ask for it. So those are pertinent issues that I think will be important to deal with if we are to deal with corruption in Ghana. Then finally, Manasseh makes a very important point about anti-SLAPP laws. I think it's very important because it's restraining, really. Just last year, we did some work on the National Service Secretariat. We wrote to them and asked for interview. And we're giving you the opportunity to respond to what we found and then also to give us information. Then you rush to court to go and injunct. Who does that? So I think it's very important. The anti-SLAPP laws are very important. If we can do that, we can take a heavy toll away from the journalists as well. Thank you so much.
So on your asset declaration, what about decentralizing the custody of the implementation of the declaration? So, for example, the president is responsible for appointing all manner of persons, right? Why shouldn't it be the obligation of the president to ensure that those persons that he or she employs or appoints have actually complied with the law before they are appointed. Why shouldn't the Speaker be the one we put in charge of doing it for MPs? Why is the CJ or the Judicial Secretary or whoever not the one responsible for this, so that we have, just bringing the obligation down to those who are actually doing either the hiring or who are superintending these people, would make it easier. Then we can keep copies of it at whether OSP or SRAJ or multiple places. Doesn't have to be one place. Public Service Commission has some, OSP keeps some, or Auditor General, so that it doesn't become this only one place you go to for it. I mean, if you're a president and you're appointing ministers and they are subject to the law, why should somebody else be the one to ensure that your ministers have complied? When you are the one doing their due diligence, you are the one checking their background, supposed to be doing all of that, right? So maybe decentralizing the obligation to ensure that the key principal officers at these points are the ones to whom the filing is being made and who must ensure that they do them. And then we just keep records somewhere. But just expecting everybody to go to Auditor General or OSP or SRAJ, and these, in our scheme of things, ministers will think, but who is this? The minister will probably respond more to the president than to SRAJ, and maybe the president will do it to whatever, the chief justice, the president. So something like that might work better than just the current system where only one body has custody, or only one body can give you the form, or one of those kinds of things.
Yeah, Chairman, I think that will work, but for accountability purposes, it may become difficult. For instance, if I am tracking compliance as a journalist, it means I have to write to 5-6 institutions.
If you are investigating a minister, you just go to the president. Office of the president. I want the answer declaration of your ministers. And the president should have custody. You want MPs, you go to the speaker, and they should have. All the people who are ministers, all the people who are speakers. Where's the record, the register in Parliament of these things? You want judges, you go to the CJ, they know who is a judge. So that at each point, you want a public officer who is not a political appointee, you go to Public Service Commission. So there are all these things kept there. So each organization is playing their role. But if you want somebody, the president doesn't, mind if the minister has filed, you have to go to OSP before you get the minister's filing. What about their boss?
If I may add, I think that at the time we were doing this story, we were not interested in specific people. Broadly, how is the level of compliance like? If you are checking that, it means that you'd have to write to this person, that person, that person. And we know that depending on who is in power, you won't get it. For instance, we've asked for information from the presidency. We were told by, specifically, we wrote to the presidency asking for the president's trips abroad when these private jet issues became an issue. And the response was that we didn't get it. So we wrote to the RTI Commission. And the commission said we could not pass the public interest test. So ideally, we could have demonstrated that by gathering signatures to show that this is a public interest issue. But for me, the work of a journalist is a public interest job. So you can't say, I need to demonstrate public interest. So depending on who is in power, you may get it. So we may write to the presidency and we won't get that information. But if it's resting with an independent body like the Auditor General and OSP, they will release it. As we speak, we've asked again for the list now, hoping that we'll be able to track the President 31st March promise. So in this instance, if I was writing, I have to write to our 6 bodies. I mean, that's a waste of, pardon my language, sir, but that would be a waste of our time. But if it's one body, you will just go to that
waste of your time. Why would it be a waste of your time? You want the information. The President is the responsible appointing authority. We have given you an obligation to make sure that the people you appoint comply with the law before you appoint them. Why?
I think it would be a little easier, I should say so rather, because the experience with the presidency, the experience with some of the ministries makes it extremely difficult. For instance, if I've written to the Mortuaries and Funeral Facilities Authority asking for information, it took 8 months to get that. We've written to Scholarship Secretariat. It took 18 months to get that for one story. For a journalist, time is very important.
Yeah, but we are also omitting the fact that a positive response is not the only response you are looking for. If the President is refusing to answer a question, that is a story. That is a report. That the President, who is under the Constitution, assuming that was the constitutional duty, the President, though compelled by the Constitution to do this, has refused to give. That is news. That is political. There's a political cost to the President not obeying the command of the Constitution. So it's not that if they refuse to give you, that is still newsworthy for a journalist. The President did not comply. I mean, and there should be a political cost to that kind of evasion. Why would you not comply? You've appointed all these ministers who haven't declared their assets, and we come to you for information and so you won't give it to us. Is it not bad enough?
Will you also be possible to have the arrangement you mentioned? Then the Auditor General, whoever is going to be the custodian, receives a copy. Is that also possible?
Absolutely. So you have multiple, you make the first filing to your immediate boss or whatever organization, and then at the same time, copies are given to these other bodies. I think it would be probably a more effective way to do it.
Thank you, sir. And my apologies for the use of the waste of time.
Apologies. You used a bad word. I didn't hear.
Thank you.
After you, our one Ghana people.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so I have to disagree with you. I don't think the decentralization for me works. I think really for the asset regime, we really need somebody in charge of the regime that really sort of not just receiving submissions and so on and so forth, but ensuring that people even identifying who is eligible to declare under the law, because there's an omnibus clause that puts an income threshold. So I think through the Accountant General, you're able to extract that and put all of them, I think you put all of them on a platform, and then we're sending, so there's a lot more administrative work. But the reason why, I remember, Mr. Chairman, you made this point that in this place, if you can't even control Aboboya and things like that, you want to go and demand accountability from the President. It's probably easier for the Constitution to say, give timelines to the Auditor General to publish those who have declared, sort of almost periodically. So if, say, currently says before you take office, so by the first 6 months or every half year, the Auditor General will publish an update of all those who are declared. If that publication comes out and ministers have not declared, the President, so it is still the same trigger, but I think it's faster because just like the Auditor General publishes the public accounts and so on and so forth, I feel that sort of routine technical, we also wanted to talk about the shroud one, because as we've been discussing, I've been looking at the Inspector General of government, the IGG in Uganda. And I'm thinking, given what Shraj already does, so Shraj already does ethics training. I think through NACAP, they're supposed to set up ethics, integrity systems, ethics training, and so on and so forth, that we could actually treat Shraj like an IGG. Because with all the compliance issues that we are putting across the system, ethics and all those things, who should be reporting on that? Like, to tell us whether people are complying or violating these rules, so that Shraj almost becomes like the internal auditor for corruption. And then the other agencies, more specialized agencies, like the YOCOs or whatever, become external auditors, right? But somebody that, because if you look at Shraj's functions, where it talks about their responsibility for, I think it's 218B, complaints concerning functioning of Public Services Commission and all of those things, that could really be converted into an IGG function, like an Inspector General of Government, where these ethics and integrity provisions and all of those things, Shraj is monitoring, but is required to report periodically, so that if somebody is failing to, comply with these things, then sanctions, take place. But you do need somebody within government system to be doing that. And I think Shraj already has the structure to be able to do that kind of activity. And I
so when you say analogous to the Inspector General, so Shraj officers from that unit would either, because you also drew analogy to the internal auditors, right? Would they be posted to these various public bodies, or would they just have a right or the authority to make periodic visits, like audits to these places to check compliance?
So currently, per NACAP, the Shraj is supposed to train, so they're supposed to be ethics officers for every entity. And then they basically are supposed to undertake certain ethics compliance.
Who are Shraj officers?
And these are officers from the
institution itself.
From the institution itself. But it's Shraj that basically trains, monitors, supervises. So they are supposed to report periodically to Shraj on ethics compliance, and then Shraj will put the report together. But it also includes training them. It also includes, so it's sort of like a system overseer, basically. But through these officers and entities, it's supposed to, like Shraj doesn't do some of the things, the public services evaluation and assessment. But that is also provided in their functions. So they could even do like a report on conflict of interest compliance across, and produce a report who is complying, who is not complying, and then it will require government to take action. But somebody needs to be checking that system. I think that's what the IGG does in Uganda, and that could actually work in terms of the complementarity between some of these investigative bodies and the many that we currently have in the system.
Even Museveni is doing some things better than we are. We are very behind. Sure.
All right. So, thank you very much for all the submissions. I'm thinking through the media and looking at ownership of media outfits by politicians. It's quite pervasive, and I know that this creates a space where either stories are covered up or narratives are shaped for political gain. And I'm wondering, there's the National Media Commission, but I see that the focus is on one, besides freeing up the space, looking at the state media. How do we make sure that media ownership by politicians is addressed without infringing also on people's rights to, own private enterprises. So that's one. And I'm wondering, we've talked about the right to information, we've talked about data, we've talked about the statistical services having a role to play. I'm wondering whether, especially from the Auditor General's perspective also, the role of technology and data and being able to capture that to make it easier to access information that helps in auditing, in publications, media, investigative journalists. So I haven't heard anything in that line, so I'd love to hear something. And then I'm just reflecting as we're talking. There are times when I've signed some of these online petitions, the parks and gardens and all those things, but you're signing it and you're thinking, this thing really won't go anywhere, but you're signing it just in case by some miracle something happens. Now, I've been interested in public interest, suits as the conversation has been going on. Is there room where, let's say, for the removal of a corrupt official or for just being able to give voice to values that people have, signatures, petitions, where can we use that as a tool to actually begin to throw the spotlight and agitate for change when it comes to corruption? I'll leave it there.
Adeshima memamu ajo emamu akwaba eba somubi dwumadie so odofo wutie me abrabo penimdifo ope wonwa wobo wo ho modene abrabo pe ahobrasefo de ne ho abowon na wayi won akire wiase ewo nkunimdie mu enti fa wo ho hye somu bi dwumadie yi mu wa bra ye hye ne mu yi efise nimdie efutuo ene nkranhye pi ahye mu ma nkranhye nsem bebre enti fa wo ho hye mu mfo aba agre papo me ena me de ho chia me ma mu nyina tena se ye nkyere ho no ye ntie omayi mu nsem a ekoso na busuafo se yebo omai Ghana din ewe ya bibre mu ha na eba asumdua na kyese yedimu kan yedimu akotene na so busuafo na nsen ensem a ekokoso ewo boko a eya asem dada asan ama ne homre so no nukranie eyade a eha adwene papa aye asefem sem aye abemubuo just obia aye awehosem sentire se eye kokase a mampani bia obeba so no oye na afem de nanso egusu a ekoso a aye ohaw kase ediama oben nano ya wada etwamu ena IGP okoho se okwa kohye ema bambo nsem bibia akoyie na busuafo oduhu a boku nabule yibi ena wobro na bo wetoto ka ebon abo ebon de kamu na meka sei ye pam no ehuro no na eya enia yenyan a sefem papa na meka sei enura enenne eye wonkuro bi a ye fre ho binduri eye binduri wabo a police fo na se bambofo adwumayefo a wabo won ho ban no wabo mienu tuo baako na yani gusu a ye hyeni dio otoso mienu nso oka ho bi a wonom atoa nananom na nokre akoye awehosem kese pa de amayen sentimi sempanifo guso ye bia enso nkosi aga ni senti mampani de adesre kese ato opemso ye otumfo setu nanim se omwa se de oboaye na ebre bia atwamu dagbon ehon sensem no oboaye ma bibia ekotodin no omwa se de beya ehon nsem a eye bokon nsem apejai eno so bejo na de aya hosem pa kase ni se eba boko a ehoye kropon a eba edwadie ehon nsem a nokre omo bank omo yade omo bo omo homodene eye nkonfam jende ene eniema bebre a yenya efiri ho no ento kwenti amasisi a bibia tofom sanso na sikakra bia na se bank se wo ho bibia gu omatutum ni nyina efiri to kwakra ya enti yesre yenuanom bokofo ye domododo na yepese nyina bua na omen yetumpon yenum nyina ye ka bom tumpon enti yebesre abampanifo keka won hu na wabua amaye atoye ye nyina yenye efutuo ni nsem bia bebe bia akomapem na emwa na boko empeja emwa na ye my Ghana asumdwe ada ye so a wiase nyina anim no enkoso a enkura ni mudie mu na ne kura bisuafo na no yawada etwamu NDC amayekom na bunu no binom a ewo asante mampon wotu wa hugo manche so na from yenu e de ye kire na ne nyina ne se MC a mampani eyi no se omo ahwe mpotamu ho no wo kire a wompeno eye ewa Esther Jomo wompeno enu ntino wotu wa hugo manche so e na wieye kura wokọ eye NDC omahye eye ekoye basabasa na basabasa yenu no wode se niam ani ejapade bebre ewi akire no wobo anwuso wosan tuja etu muhye hodrepe na enu so akoye hawkase sentini se enu so anna enu achi eye temanso emebuna ewo ho esoreye na wonso wosoreye na ani sen wonyina akobo odompem ewo tema Metropolitan Assembly se enya dia mayor a wonu mampani bia opese oyi wonu se obeyi obi a onye obi a ofitema hwa na nya sadia wonu empene ena no so ekoye nsempi enu achi saa na kwesi adai a etwamu enu so emebuna ewo okankwe north wonu so ede menka ne sen basabasayo ena afi wode ntrenebo ni nyina ne se wose nipa wo pese mampani eyi no eye Abdul Rashid enti se mampani entie won na okoyi obi fufuro bi anya de a wo bepene so talent so saa eno so NDC mabuna ewo ho wose won pe owura eye John Milliam efrise wo hu so ye obi a NDC anase eye MPP amanyekuo no ne ho ewom ode ne ho ahyem enti enya de a won enije ho se mampani obeyi sa nipa no enti no na asem a etwago no ye besre se nsem mpanifo ensom fankwa dindwemu na wamwa na adwebre yie entoyie na ebusuafo ye to so a na sei eba ye dan han a ehon nsem ewo Ghana ha enu so akoye bibia ewo ho ayedeja titititini nyina nanka eba dan han ho nsem a ha adwene de na so sese no obi kan ye aboho mienu aye ohaw kase titiru se eba ye nkuro akese mu a eye haw pa enu na yetiri ayeye ya to nsa afre eye rent control pani baako a wakwadare eba edan han ene ho nsem a wakwadare mu a ɔde ho nkyerɛkyerɛ ɛbɛdom yɛn eti yɛtwa yɛn ho aba diadwa na frɛdɔfoɔ bi na yɛn nyinaa yɛnka mom ntie nsɛmpa a ɛbɛ yi. Adesima ma me mamu nyina jo me san emamu akwaba na sede na manu busu a meka no abusuafo efie eya ade ba ko a ye nyina ye ni je ho se ye benya bie sentini se eno ena kire se wabobra se wo bi a wankasa wakoma eto wo yam eboa ema ahomeka se wonya ahomeka ya anigye bi se wonsoso ba wiase no wa mebre enwu na so se de na meka no se no akoye ohaw se ubenya dan ahan no ehun nsem akoye bebre enka ye fifi a anase ye wo fi a ye benya ahomeka ema na ya so da ye papa ne ye firi ho akwadwuma asomdue mu nanso enei no nipa bebre baby a wotie no wonfa no ahogno so se eba edan han ene ehun nsem a enti eba Ghana hade a yeka edan han ehun nsem a titiri won a eti krom anase won a eti krokasie mu no ya na akoye nsem pi amadodo no aneno ena eneye tiri ayeyie yensa aka rent control empanimfo no wo mu ba ko a wakoda nsemi mu a ode ho nkyerɛkyerɛ breyen na opanikasie ni dede owura Emmanuel Hove Posu owura Emmanuel Hove Posu or head of PR rent control department opanikasie me mo akwaba
Obama me jesu
ho so aye feye
me
de na me hyewa ho fayi a odi ebehia umia beya o ene nkomo no ebeye de
Obama me dance
yo
dance
enti mama wakwa abai se ye ka rent control a
okay
ye nyina de be obi a tiremu ni se mo ena mo hye omei eba edan han sem ene ntutoye nanso yen shada nyim mwadwuma nani so yie ankasa ti wadan roma fa yembe mo asukọ kakra yi na so kakra kyerɛ na yehunu sɛ de mudwuma die no
me dance dem enti me edi kan no rent control department ye group ana department bi a ehye aban ase aban a ehye na ase no ehye Ministry of Works and Housing ase enti se Ministry of Works and Housing share aban se a enye yenso se na e kan yesu ye share Ministry of Works and Housing ase na ya botai titio no se on sa aban bia ni programs se na ye kan no enti ne edika ye o ye function se ye beboa na aban hihye ya odi ba no se fa rent ho a ye beboa se ye be ye ni ye na nyema se ye mfan tutu ho because ye wo sa ni knowledge wo ho no ye be hihye ni ye na ya implement eti needi kan no yes but once mbra na yedi adwuma so eti se we hwe Rent Act no 1963 Act 220 no so we hwe section 5 of the act now a chair niema ye as a department eti needi kan no any baby amasi dan na akosi no ese me fa ebuo nka ho ansa na media to obi anim say me dan yi me gi sika we na wa betene no eye renta me dey to so bi say ye ni kwan say ye to dan a ye bebemu ya se bi ani say ye be renti dan a eho na ye bem eti se ni amaka no say we si dan ni yue na we nim se ni a wo di beji no ye wo expect o a mo ba be hwe bebi a wa si dan na si ni ma wo di asi dan no na ya hwe say dan yi se ni a wa si ni fefefe e say wo gi sika sei ba se wo utumi yes agena yen ka say ye pe na ye expect ba betumi contractive valuers ni sa nyema no no mo ahihye sa nyema no ba se tenant bi ba no fere say edan ya se nchen enu dan ya wasi ni na ye pe adan na wo de wo gi 1000 na onu de ogi 500 eti tenant wo kwan say obeben ye na obeka chen say ni current dan ya o 1000 Ghana cedis so 1000 ni pesa mo be hwe mo ma ye friend assessment eti say assessment landlord no wo kwan say nyame kan ye no si dan ni ye no nim senya odibaji a obetimi aben ye say tenant no ba no feel say scammer opese wo gi no too much ja onu so wo kwan say obeben ye na ya be hwe dan no eti say hwe wi a ye na be ka say edan wi awasi any baby awasi dan e say wo gi say ye yes a wi a e be mamu na certificate sa certificate na e be throw wo mu say wo dan ye say wo gi say for afi menu 2 years it is afi no twem 2 years no twem na still why improvement and now we know she cry now on the man say every 2 years na onipa betumi atumi dem it is a 2 years no twem na still we nim say na wo de beji a wo betumi aben ye it in American say me I wo act no say ye be yes an ya friend assessment no be ba be hwe down no ye to so be say one say landlord ni tenant de ehihye ya obi asini dan obi betene mu enti relationship bi wo I won say where to nipa me no akotena no tawa bi ebetumi abeba enti say ba utumi call police station ubetumi abai when control na ubetumi akokot na ahwe say asema mu ntimi ase no enfa na webetu enti ye wo sa expertise no say ye behwe na itawa bi a between landlords and tenants no mu di ben ya e be hwe no na ya siesie mu ntem ye to so bi say ya ma ya sa tum ni say we sit down no bi antimu a ubetimi di sa information na bearing say ma sit down ana obi abetina me dem wa free up entimi wo edan ya obi antimu enti ye be register sa dan no say me omo 90 omo hwehwe dan no so mo su ben ya ye be catch on say kwasi masi we ho edan ho asa de no eni ho biem o de ye be call nyoma bebe na esi wo edan rent high mo enti nyoma kakra so we share section 5 of the Rent Act 1963 no nyoma kakra wo ye as a rent control office
na che de what kan amame hu say mo dwuma de no emotre ba kokra wo kan ya na menimu a eye me wanwane se bia fiewura no esini dan no pese ode ma han obetimi akoho na matre ebo a esefata se ode ma obi han
no mame
me hu le sa akora na adentina eba edan han ewo titiru enkuro yenkuro akese mu a ya na emu nsema koyetare ayese adebia yentimi nko
okay
aden
okay
no koso
no di kan ye say on say aban entumi si dan no mai enti anko na omusi emudan na omudi arenti bible be say die na omudi si dan no cement anya iron rods anyemanu enti sanyemanu we be say ni buwa ye say enti so obi akoto sa anyemanu na di abesi mi dan ya definitely sika no odi ahyemu no eni no obeye calculation say 20 years na minimum say menya misika me calculate na every month I say but say aban sidan maye na watiso amaye dia ebema edan high no aba form eti ne edi kan say nyema ye di sidan no kosro aban so ni sika odi be sidan a odi be maye na ya tua no kakra eti ama nipa bebe won say nipa bebe na edan ba ko nipa bebe train eti say nipa bebe train a onipa kra ni saye di dunu onu benya because me a landlord na oba me chain na me see me give me die 500 na fe na odi mi be kasa bebe no bi madam for na me mi tenant bi dina mechi no ma landlord me signal say me dey met me at 1000 Ghana me pe bi aka che o na wa fe me ni na mi pa kro wo sika no ya adabaji enti se na make me pa ni ma bebe na esi so hwe assassin kra yes ba wo sunu so ye call ye crasia e from ma say ban kro kese ma strong na it is a makoji le wo ban na me dey ato asasi me dey ato materials na me dey asidan ya we expecting me say me dey be chew in court and na meti swama na sika say me say me nya sika in 20 years e be take me 100 years it is na me enema bebre na ekoso wo rental environment
na afie twemu Dr. Baumia obi adwumadie bi ene so a ye fe no National Rental Assistance Scheme
okay
na chese wo de bua adwumayefo
okay
na obi a ontimi enya sika bum emfa nko han dan no enti hu ya ketwa bi patete so se de be ya ukọ na nsaka bia ebebo no watimi aha dan enti dwumadie no ehyaase ekoso ewo enkan ha eye epeye mantem asante mantem ene emiamia bebre na mi bi fase se na ehunsem ekwesie na oha bi wo ho a ekoso wo ho ebi anti ye bi wo ho a omo nyaaye no omo de ba ana se ebua omanfo
okay na me da say we di kan ye say ye di incro ana regions isia na start ye se na wo bobo so no ye di Accra ni tema ye ko Takrade Kumasi Koforidua Techima any tamale I did start here but I watch you say na a pilot project nanka for 2 years no na yes roughly 2 years no e be hwe say senior air kono na ya biemu ama 16 regions no it is senior o kanu how ana challenges e wo ho sesi anu ye say ye discover gun near say na a revolving fund say obi itia na obi iji obi itia na obi iji but number of people are omo apply no almost 11,000 were Accra 944 were Takrade 2,172 were Kumasi Koforidua 455 yeba Techima no omo apply 568 Tamale 185 at the total no omo apply no 15,600 omo ye tumi bo omo total no 2,970
ena na cho say omo bo omo so
omusa chem say ye di kan sikana anka ye hwehwe wa ban ho say aban dia sika ye hwehwe wa ban na odi agun na ye tumi abie ama onipa bebre na mo apply no embae but no critical me say nipa bebre ko say mo ko apply a mo ni nyema e say mo dey apply on say criteria na nyema ye hwehwe wa on say e say wo ye onipa wo ye adwuma ye be say busu bia woji aketua because at the end of the day no you just can directly from Winsem. I say we any banker and now company and the shishero say every month no what be sika say every month you beti sika say or account no and this salary you find say 1,000 Ghana I say you say 300 cedis or account no and say we did 1,000 now I could did down no boy 500 you to me wow because you give 50% of your salary now then na woni roma ebedi enti nipa bebe omo ni sa niema no ansa na mo enti omo bebra bebe wo sa 15,000 mo ba omo qualify say you bo mo say nyame kan no sika na edi bebo mo no emma ana emma e enti na wo say nipa ya bo mo no esa but omo bebe wo a fraud I say critical because aban sika you person you bet na you bet pontifical say yakodi aban sika not knowing obi na wa beje sika no eti yen to me bie mo bia say wo ni sika wo yo sika na ya bia ma say na make am dey critical ni say you bet me sure say wo ye adwuma abusumi bia wo nya aketia na wo nya no enye say aketia keke ye ma okwan na ko hwehwe dan no say wo ko hwehwe dan na make sure say you 30% ebetumi ati rent no ase na make am we di 1,000 what could did down 800 Ghana cedis yen to me mwawo eti we na so mu apply advice omo eti na ama no apply no ewo so omo ayabo omo no ewo from it is ya ka say adwuma de neguso ayekoso statistics I mean ma we no ye February statistics ene ye ma ekoso
asempa na de ba ko ayehu se no so ha dwen pa agent one wa ejinam no so ma eni ha mani ha haye enti no mi bisase ewo momrem eyemra me kwan so a ana sesen
ma mi do asidem ye show your rent act no ma ohu agent for mo ejuma mo ye but ne wo ye act no that's act 220